Gretchen. Nice to see you. Nice to have you here. Welcome to everyone for this International Humanistic Management Association necessary conversation on thriving in the new world of work. I will turn this over to Gretchen in a moment, but just briefly, I put in the chat a short message. We will be recording the session. So on your bottom left, there's a mute button. We also can control that by muting all, and we will do that if we need to. The recording will be available. And if you have questions or discussion points for Gretchen and for this conversation, please post these to the chat and we will moderate the discussion from here as we get going. Many thanks to the Donahue Center for Business Ethics and Social Responsibility and the Manning School of Business at UMass Lowell for sponsoring these necessary conversations. Michael, can I turn it over to you briefly on EMA? Are you still there?
I am.
Great, please. This is Michael Pearson from the International Humanistic Management Association.
Yeah, so thank you, Erica. Thank you, Gretchen, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The International Humanistic Management Association is trying to sort of foster these conversations. Now that we have a virtual Zoom, this is even easier than before. So I thank you all for being here. The conversations that we're trying to foster are around a different narrative, a different paradigm on organizing, centered on dignity and well-being. And I leave it at that, but I encourage you all to check out the webpage and maybe get connected, become a member, support our work, and just if you have something that you wanted to add in conversations and maybe lead, we're open for these kind of conversations and looking forward to engaging. So thank you very much. Thanks, Erica. I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So again, welcome to all, and note the mute function if you haven't already, and please again post your chat questions for Gretchen. Gretchen, I've lost you on my feed, but I think you're still there. Are you still there?
I am here.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So I would love to turn the conversation over to Gretchen Spreitzer from Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Many of you know Gretchen, are very familiar with her work. She is one of the co-founders of the Positive Organizational Scholarship work that's been happening for years now and grown. And by the way, there is a Positive Organizational Scholarship Conference coming up, and I don't have that link up, but if your work aligns with POS, please submit your work for the conference. We'll look forward to seeing you there. Gretchen is speaking today on thriving in the new world of work. I'm excited to hear much more about that. Gretchen, I think I'll turn it over to you if you're ready.
I am. Thank you. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Erica and I were pre-testing everything last week, and I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I'm now on my laptop instead of my desktop, and I'm just trying to bring over, I had some really beautiful slides I wanted to share with you, but they have not come over on email yet, so I'm going to keep an eye out for them. First of all, let me thank the International Humanistic Management Association, especially Erica and Michael, for inviting me. I'm glad you mentioned our research conference. The deadline for it is December 14th, and the conference is in June. So I really hope a lot of you will be interested in submitting something and coming and joining us. So very excited about it. Okay, so I want to share with you a little bit. I'm gonna share a few thoughts on to open up the conversation, and I'm still hoping to be able to share some slides with you. But for the time being, I want to talk with you a little bit about the notion of thriving in the new world of work. In the last few years, these two interests of mine have really started coming together. So about 10 years ago, Jane Dutt and Kathy Sutcliffe and I were having a conversation. And in the conversation, we were talking about how much we loved our jobs as academics and the work that we were doing, we were very excited about. But we also felt like our work had the potential to burn us out. And so we began a summer research project trying to understand what enabled people to thrive in everyday work. So a lot of the work at that time had been on resilience, how people bounce back and have growth in traumatic situations. But we were really interested in how you can thrive in any situation, whether you're in a difficult situation or everyday situation of overload or complexity, and what it took to be able to thrive under everyday work conditions. So we began now a multi-year research program. As we began our work on thriving, we were able to identify it as when individuals feel like they're making progress, when they're on a positive trajectory, when they're growing but not burning out. And when we actually began the process of trying to measure that, there were two distinct measures or two distinct dimensions. One was about vitality. When you're thriving, you feel really energized by your work. Sometimes we talk about a feeling of aliveness, where work is not depleting, but actually creating energy in the doing of the work. But that by itself wasn't enough. We can feel very energized in social situations, but that by itself isn't thriving unless there's also a learning component to it too, where individuals are growing, they're getting better, they're trying new things, and that thriving is really when those two things come together. I know there's some PhD students on this call, and sometimes I feel like we're in situations we have a lot of growing, but we feel very depleted for one reason or another. And I think doctoral education, unfortunately, can have some of those characteristics. So thriving is when those two things come together. And in our work, we've also been working on establishing, well, why should we care about that? Why is thriving at work important? And as we began this work, we wanted to establish both from a personal and professional standpoint that thriving really did matter. And we saw that thrivers have higher levels of job performance. They're more proactive. They take more initiative. Indeed, they have less burnout. We've been able to also measure that they have fewer missed days of work, fewer doctor visits. And one that was really important to me, when I began this work, I was the mom to two young daughters. I had a husband with health problems. I had parents that needed some attention, also due to some health problems. And I also was an active member of the community. And I said, man, if thriving at work is a great thing, but it comes at the expense of being able to thrive in other aspects of life, that is a problem. And so I was very interested in, is there positive spillover into personal life when people are thriving, or does it crowd out that potential? And so we were really excited when we found that there was quite a positive relationship, especially from when you're thriving at work, to be able to thrive in outside of work aspects. So I was really pleased about that finding. And then we also were working hard to establish, well, what can leaders do to build a thriving culture? And this links quite a bit to some of my prior work on empowerment in the workplace, because we did find that providing decision-making discretion, allowing people to have autonomy, some freedom, some voice was important. I think that's especially high on the learning dimension. When information gets shared, that builds trust. That's another key way that leaders can build a thriving culture. Not information shared on a need-to-know basis, but more generally. When there's not incivility in the workplace, being part of the Center for Positive Organizations, I'd even go further that we really want high-quality connections. But at the very least, if we want people to be thriving, we got to get rid of those jerks at work. We got to get rid of those incivil kind of behaviors. And then the last piece in terms of the key levers for how to build a thriving culture is around offering performance feedback. So I'm going to pause right here, and I have a question for you all, and I'm going to ask you to use your chat feature. I want you to think about now what you know about the new world of work from your own perspective, maybe what you see with your students, maybe some things that you're doing that are different than maybe what we've seen traditional academics or doctoral students do. So on a scale from 1 to 10, I want you to put a number in the chat feature, and we're going to look at that. We'll report back a little bit some of those numbers that we're seeing. On a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is more thriving, 1 is less thriving, how do you think the new world of work is impacting people's ability to thrive at work? So again, use the chat feature on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is, I think the new world of work is really enhancing people's ability to thrive, to 1 where they're not at all. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and we'll see what kind of numbers are coming up. All right, 5, 5, 6, 4, 4, 5, 3, 6, 4. Wow, you guys are great. 5, 5, 4, 6, 7, 4, 6. There's a letter. 5, 6, 7, 4, 5. It looks like a lot of numbers are around the middle. I see a few 3s. I see a few 7s, a couple 8s in there. So it seems like I'm hearing a lot of feeling kind of neutral, not sure yet. A few of you definitely are on the more positive side. So I think that's really interesting. And so let me share with you a little bit about what some of the key trends are that we found in our research on thriving in the new world of work. We completed a literature review last summer that was published in the annual review on psychology, organizational psychology. And in our review, we identified how some of the key things that are changing, especially around alternative work arrangements. And so in the last century, really, when we thought about work, and we thought about jobs, we thought about standard work where people aspired to full-time work, 40-hour-a-week job that was performed on a fixed schedule, generally something like 8 to 5, or maybe you were on shift work and you had a night shift, but it was kind of work on a fixed schedule. And it was at the firm's place of business. So you went into an office, or you went into a factory, or you went into, some location. So what we're finding is that a lot of that is changing. Some of them faster than others, depending on the kind of work that people are doing. But that if people have control over when they work, where they work, and the conditions on which their work contracts are solidified, they can have 2 very different experiences. When people have more control or more say over when they work, where they work, and how they work, this new world of work is really enhancing thriving. But when the organization is controlling any one of those 3 things, the experience is quite different. So let me share just very briefly, and then I'm going to open it up. I think Erica has a question, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So the first, we're finding 3 elements of flexibility that seem to be mattering in this new world of work. The first is about flexibility in work contracts. So over the last 30 years, we've seen job security being eroded. I saw my friend Anil Mishra is on the call. Anil and I were doing some work a long time ago about how downsizing affects not just the victims, but the survivors, the people who are left to pick up the pieces. And if you open up the Wall Street Journal today, you'll see GM yet again is now downsizing. But it's interesting that today we see with, so that's flexibility from the organization's perspective, that they want talent, but they don't always want to have they want to have the freedom to decide when and where they hire that talent and when they let it go. Sometimes we hear the words agile work, but the reality is that the organizations today have more permeable boundaries with people coming in and out, more temp work, more contract work, and we see this not only in the US, but in Canada, Europe, and Japan. And these non-standard jobs are capturing most of the net employment growth. And what's interesting is that I think when 30 years ago, when Anil and I were studying this, people were in non-standard jobs when they couldn't get a standard job. Now what's interesting is we see more people who are choosing to do non-standard work or temporary work. It's not just when you can't get something else. And in fact, companies like Kelly Services today, they're a supplier of professional workers as well as kind of frontline work. And I think in business schools, we're seeing some of this also captured and more people wanting to do kind of entrepreneurial things. So that's one issue that we're seeing is kind of flexibility in work contracts. Another kind of flexibility we're seeing is when people are working. Like, do people have choice rather than it being 8 to 5 or 9 to 6? People are having more choice. And I think as a result of having technology like this and email, people can do their work at, many hours of the day. And of course, there's some real benefits that come from having that kind of flexibility, so that you have the time to go see the dentist, or you have the time to go to a parent-teacher conference, or whatever it is that you like to do, fitting exercise in the middle of your day, not at 6 in the morning in the dark. So flexibility when people are working, again, if it's where you have control over that, that can really enable more thriving. But when it's all about the organization, making these decisions about when people work, when the flexibility is only for the benefit of the organization, that's a lot more problematic. So we heard the story in the New York Times a few months ago about clopenings. Starbucks is asking workers to basically be on call. And if they're not busy, then the person said, don't come in, but they don't get paid for that time. So people have a hard time figuring out childcare. They have a hard time figuring out if they're a student and, they're trying to do classes because they're on call and they don't have a lot of control over when they're working. So that's the second. It's flexibility of timing when you're working. And then the third type of flexibility is about where you work. And again, there's some really wonderful things if you have choice. Like, I think as I'm looking at some of your pictures of videos, it looks like some of you are working from home offices or from your home, and that's wonderful. It can reduce commutes, and we know commutes are one of the things that lead to the lowest levels of job satisfaction. Very positive correlation between the length of your commute and life satisfaction. But also just, again, having that flexibility to, be able to take care of waiting for a repair person, or just having more time without interruptions. And again, if that flexibility is at the choice of the employee, that can lead to a lot of opportunities for thriving. But if it's only for the flexibility of the organization, then that creates more problems. So we see more companies today reducing office space, even people today not even having cubicles. Sometimes they use the word hoteling, where people come in and they're just assigned a space, and everything's electronic on their computer, and there's no office space that they can call home. One of the other downsides about people working outside of an office situation is loneliness. So sometimes people feel quite lonely working out of a home office. It might be nice to work in your pajamas, but you're less likely to have those nice kind of hallway conversations that make work more meaningful and work worthwhile. So one of the trends that I've been studying quite a bit over the last few years is the genesis of co-working spaces, which are spaces that allow people to still have a work community, even though they might not have a work office. And one of the things that we're finding with these co-working spaces is that a major benefit, in addition to being a professional working space, where people have access to a copier and a conference room and a mailing location, that people are also saying that they're really important for them to feel like they have a workplace identity, a place where they can go to and feel like they're at a work home. And so this issue around flexibility of where people are working can also be something really powerful in terms of enhancing thriving, but it can also detract if the employee has little choice over where they work, or if they feel very lonely. So once again, those three dimensions: flexibility about work contracts, flexibility about where you work, and flexibility about when you work. And the more employees, or workers, I should say, because not everybody is an employee, some of them are independent contractors, the more that flexibility is benefiting the worker, the more thriving that we're seeing, but the more that flexibility is benefiting primarily the employer or the work organization, the less thriving that we see. So I'll pause here. I'm also going to see if I can find some of my slides. And Erica, I think you're going to get us started.
Yeah, great. Thank you. If you do have slides to pull up, wonderful. And again, there were some materials that were sent, including this article that Gretchen just talked about. But the question I have, so I love the idea of thriving and how that connects to dignity and well-being, both sort of employees and also sort of at a more macro level of organizations and presumably communities and beyond into society. So I'm curious, for individuals, for our 21st century, students or workforce, to take advantage of or to move that numerical value on the potential for thriving up toward 10. Can you talk about any skill sets or awarenesses or characteristics that individuals might need to be cultivating?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Erica, it's so fun. In January, I'll be starting teaching a course I've just taught once before. So it's a brand new course called Thriving in the New World of Work, or the Art and Science of Thriving in the New World of Work. It's a senior capstone for our BBA students. I'm happy to share the syllabus with any of you that might be interested. But we're really in this class drawing on this research basis and helping our students who still, I have to say, at the Ross School of Business, still many of them are going into traditional workplaces like consulting or financial services or marketing. But I think what we're seeing that happens is after a few years, they're finding, gosh, the life of a consultant, it's really hard. I'm on the road all the time. I'm having trouble, creating a support system or having friends at home. They're missing the camaraderie that comes from being part of a community at a college. And so in the class, we're really trying to help them learn from the research about how to make that transition from the world of school to the world of work. And in the short term, they might be in a more kind of traditional kind of job. But after 2 or 3 years, we're seeing many more that are choosing to go freelance, many more that are choosing to be part of a startup or some kind of entrepreneurial thing. So one thing we do really work with them on is thinking about how to create a sense of meaning or purpose in their work, because I think that solidifies and creates a lot of resilience when they do run into humps in the road in their careers. And so trying to have them really think about what their life purpose is, what they care about, what's meaningful to them, how they're making a difference through their work. So that's one. A second one that we're really helping people think about is this notion of job crafting. So Jane Dutton, Amy Wisniewski, and Justin Berg created a tool that our center now has available to people. And it's about, we all have a job description, and there are certain things that we definitely have to get done within our job, but there's also room around the edges for us to make small changes that allow us to bring more meaning, more of our passion, more of our strengths to the work that we're doing. And so one thing that we're seeing, which I think is really brave and really interesting, is more of our students having what we call side hustles going on. So I don't know if that's a term many people are familiar with, but the idea that you've got, sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not paid. Sometimes they're, like volunteer works, people sitting on boards of director. That's kind of the traditional way that we might think about a side hustle, but it might be a side business that people are coming up with, making cupcakes at home and delivering them for special events. Or I had a student who started a podcast, and over like the course of a year, this podcast had thousands of listeners, and they were actually starting to figure out maybe there was a business model, but they were doing it they were doing it alongside kind of doing a traditional kind of job. And it was kind of fortifying for them. And it also helped them create more purpose, maybe when their own job didn't have that much of that. And it gave them maybe some security where if the job didn't work out, they had this other thing that was brewing that they were excited about that maybe they could develop further.
Great. I'm seeing some questions pop up in the chat, and one of the early themes is if you could just comment a bit more about thriving. And I'm just looking through some of the questions. How can it be measured? Does it depend upon national culture? Can you be psychologically empowered but not thrive? is it generalizable across cultures?
Yeah, so the first thing is we do have a validated measure of thriving. So it measures those 2 dimensions. If you Google Spreitzer validated thriving measure, I think it would come up. It was published in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. To the point about I see that question from Ignacio, who I was on his dissertation committee not too long ago, about national cultures. We have studied thriving in a variety of different cultures. I don't know if we've studied it in your culture, Ignacio. Maybe you have. But we do find that that it is valid in different cultures, that people do resonate with it, and that the measure does seem to hold up in different cultures. I'd be curious if some of you have some ideas about why you think it might not be. I think the vitality and the learning dimensions, I think, are very valid. The question I would ask is, are there different levers, or are there different things that are more potent in different cultures? For example, in a culture that's more, has more values that are about community, more values that are about less about the individual, I would guess some of the levers around relational kind of things would be more important than maybe in the US, where maybe that empowerment or decision-making discretion is more important, but maybe in a culture where community is more important, the incivility piece might be a bigger factor. So that would be my hunch. We haven't done a systematic test across cultures, but my hunch would be that the levers might have different weightings in different cultures.
Okay, great. There are some questions, but I think Michael posted that article, so that's in the chat, toward its measurement construct validation.
Great, thank you.
JLB. So thanks, Michael.
And Gretchen, just a quick, the syllabus that you offered, the number of people are interested. Can you send that to us, that we share it with everybody? Is it possible?
Yeah, I'll make a note.
Okay,
great. That. And I have to say that we're teaching it again in January, so we're making some adjustments. But what I'll share with you is from last term.
Great. Thanks. So I'm going to just go back a little bit in the chat to the first question. So kudos to Bill Veltrup for asking the first question in the chat. Some say that all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get. What context and infrastructure design elements do you feel are most important in growing an organization where everyone has the opportunity to thrive? That's Bill's question.
Wow, that is a doozer, Bill. Oh my gosh. And I completely agree with the initial assertion. I think it's very, I think 2 ways that I would think about that question. The first is, I think that we each have an individual responsibility to figure out what it means for us to thrive. And what do I mean by that? So when we developed the initial theoretical model about thriving, we had those 4 things as kind of contextual features that increase the probability that people might thrive. Those were the decision-making discretion, reducing incivility, sharing information, and providing performance feedback. Those are about kind of organization design elements. But the piece that I personally found the most exciting in our thriving model is that that's kind of deterministic, but thriving is also about what we do ourselves to make small changes in our environment that matter to us for our own thriving and the thriving of those that that we're responsible for or that we care about in the organization. And so what do I mean by that? We talk about co-construction of the work environment so that it produces resources in the doing of the work. And what are those resources? Well, they're things that individuals might have more control over than those contextual features. So one is about positive emotions. That's a really important resource that we can work ourselves to source, to increase through our interactions with others. Another is a sense of meaning. I mentioned that in how we can fortify our students. But we also found that to be a really crucial research that individuals could co-construct in their work. Let's see, positive emotions, positive meaning, positive relationships. That was another key kind of resource that individuals have control over. We can't change. We might have a jerk that we have in our work. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a coworker. We can try to improve our relationship with them, but we can also develop positive relationships around that person with other people that can be fortifying to us. So if I were to answer the question, it's a tough question, but the piece I would say is that there are things that are within our control, even if we're in a system that doesn't feel like it's a really thriving culture. There's ways that we can fortify ourselves with some of those resources around positive emotions, positive meaning, and positive work relationships.
Great. I see another question, and because you just mentioned it, this is a technical question, I think, but can you comment on the relationship between thriving and experienced meaningfulness? Are they similar, different? Are you able to talk about that a bit? This is for Chris.
Yeah, so we do see, again, positive meaning is one of those resources that enhances thriving. I believe that we're going to feel a lot more vitality in our work if we feel that sense of meaning. And if we're helping others find that sense of meaning. I have a great working paper that we haven't found a home for yet with Chris Porath about how thriving individuals not only feel more meaning about their work themselves, but they're also really good at helping others feel or see more meaning in their work. And I think that piece actually might even, I think there's a reciprocal relationship. If I have meaning in my work and I'm helping others find the meaning in their work, then that actually builds more thriving in my own work. So I think they're highly related. I see meaning as one of those resources that fortifies and enable more thriving. I think it'd be very hard to feel really energetic about your work, that vitality dimension, if you didn't feel like there was some meaning that was part of it.
Great. I see that JC Spender had asked a question. JC, are you there? Do you want to just ask about that language vocabulary phenomenon? Because I'm not sure that I can ask it the way that you might have intended it to be asked.
Hi, Gretchen. I'm interested, as you know, I've long been interested in management as a language phenomenon. Managing being, amongst other things, the control of the language. So I'm interested in the language changes that are going on here as we're discussing this new world. You know, and we've had hoteling, co-work, contractors, and so forth. And indeed, the whole notion of flexibility, you know, seems to me to be a way of getting around the essence of the work relationship, which is a power relationship. So these are various devices that we use to stop talking about power. And I was asking if you know of anybody that's actually researching the language changes that are going on.
I am not, but I think what's really interesting, Jace, I would love for you to do that work, and I'll definitely keep my eye out for it. However, the one thing I just want to say is that I think one of the things that we're finding in this new world of work is that flexibility is sometimes changing the power relationship in a positive way. What do I mean by that? So I said a few minutes ago that a number of years ago, the desired effect or the desired outcome for people was to have full-time standard work. And today we're seeing more and more people rejecting that to rather be an independent worker where they can choose the kind of projects that they want to work on, when they can say no to something, you know, some project that isn't fitting with what matters to them, what's meaningful to them. Now, there's two challenges to this that I would say are really important to keep in mind. One is that the people that are most able to do that are the people that are the most powerful. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're the people that have experience and skills that are in high demand, because then a company is willing to work with them on the individual's terms rather than on their terms. So coming back, Erica, to your question a few minutes ago, one of the things we say to our students is the more you can have up-to-date skills, the more position that you will be in to be able to have more of a say of what your work contract is, or the kind of things that, even if you have a full-time job, the kind of opportunities that you have to craft your work. So, we see students now that are learning computer programming, even if they're in, a whole different field, because they're feeling like that's giving them some marketable skills that they might be able to use in some way to enrich their portfolio that might give them some more power in that relationship. The second one is that, of course, the downside of not having a full-time standard work is the loss of benefits. Now, that's not an issue in a lot of countries where those benefits like retirement and healthcare aren't co-linked with the job. But in the US, unfortunately, that is a problem. And we're seeing kind of hybrid organizations that are popping up, like the Freelancers Union, that are providing the kind of group level efficiency to still be able to give freelancers healthcare and retirement and other things that normally come with a job in the US. But we need more examples. We need more opportunities for people to be able to have those safety nets that are really important, that normally come with full-time work in the US.
As a follow-on to that, Sandra, I know you posed a question that I think is a nice next conversation. Are you there? And can you unmute if you are there? There we go.
Yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts about how we, or whether we have any kind of responsibility for changing the very nature of organizations, because I'm not convinced that most people have a lot of control over what happens in them, and just whether we should just accept that some of them are pretty abusive.
So is your question whether I agree we should never accept something where there is, where people are...
My question has to do with our responsibility as academics for thinking about sort of the nature of organizations and really trying to change that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have a lot of responsibility. We are developing the next generation of leaders in our universities. And if we're able to be convincing to this next generation about the kind of broken business model that we have right now, that seems really key. I think it's very hard without the research behind it. I mean, so I have some students who are I think, very idealistic and really want to be in a different kind of work organization. And I really applaud that. I think that's working around the edges. I think we need to start real conversations and provide the real research about what the alternatives might be. So, the B corporations, the positive business, the POS approach that we have here at the University of Michigan. I think when we can solidify, for example, our whole vision now at the Ross School of Business is around positive business, we might be attracting, a different set of students than that would be going to Wharton, maybe, or NYU, which might desire something a little bit different. But I think we're creating more legitimacy for these kind of ideas in this next generation of leaders, and through our alums that are in different kinds of leadership roles. I think we also have to be modeling it in academia too. So I think we can be, we could be running like experiments in our own institutions, realizing we're in a bureaucracy, realizing we're not having to generate a profit. But for example, our Center for Positive Organization, we have to be really careful that we are inspiring our students, not just by showing them the research and identifying bright spots in the field, but that we are a bright spot ourselves. So we're always trying to think about, all right, well, if co-working is, the way we're moving toward, we should have an organization, a center that looks like the new world of work. So people aren't in their own offices. We use different ways to introduce people that not only demonstrate their role, but also their soul, the things that they care about. We do celebrations at the beginning of meetings so that we're building those positive emotions from the beginning. So I think Sandra, I think it's a really important question. And I think that we have a responsibility to start changing the mindset of what's possible with our students and with our alums. And I think we need to be the source of experiments. So we're not being hypocritical, saying one thing, but still leading in a very traditional organization.
So, and I think you're speaking now to a number of discussion points that are coming up around this bigger theme and opportunity to really, how do we move from thriving as the responsibility of the individual to thriving also as the responsibility of the organization. So great. Let's see, I'm just scanning the chat. There was a question to go back to thriving. There was a question about generational differences. Do you think that I think I'm asking the right question here. Do you think that thriving is experienced in different ways depending on the generation?
Yeah, so we haven't found strong generational differences. I would say that when people leave school, I think they go into work organizations having expectations that often are not met right at the beginning. And I think that can damper people's feelings of thriving early on. I think we do tend to see higher thriving scores as people build more experience and they build more tenure in the organization. Maybe that's coming back to JC's point about once people have a little bit more power, maybe they can have more choices or more control. Maybe more information does get shared with them. Maybe more performance feedback is provided to them. So we do see a small trend with experience and with tenure in a job or organization. We don't see strong differences between men and women around thriving, and we don't see strong generational differences.
Interesting. And just again, sorry, I'm just also looking through the chat as there was a question also about this was from Rocio, differences between flow and well-being. I'm not sure if I've captured the question. So if I have not, please feel free to speak up, Rocio. But flow and well-being and thriving, I am imagining, is the question. How do we think about all of these?
So in terms of well-being, and wellness, we actually have found some where I mentioned some of the outcomes of thriving, of people having less burnout and more fewer doctor visits and fewer missed days of work. We also find that people healthy behaviors are something that, especially around that vitality dimension of thriving, is key. So when I teach this with my students, I talk a lot about sleep is really crucial. I mean, my kids laugh at me, but and my students too, because they're so often have such poor sleep habits. But I ask people to try an experiment for 1 week. Try going to bed at the same time every night. Try to get 7 hours of sleep and see if you feel different. And ask your roommates, are you a different person when you're getting getting more sleep. Exercise or movement is really important. I talk about the importance of hydration. If you're drinking enough water throughout the day, you're automatically going to have movement because you're going to have to get up every so often to use the restroom. We think better when we have more movement. If we're just sitting at our desk, if we start feeling stuck or depleted, that's a great time to get up and do a walk. At our center, we use a lot of walking meetings. Because you're getting the work done, but you're also, through that movement, creating energy. I find them especially helpful when you're talking about a difficult topic. When you're facing each other, it can feel more adversarial, but when you're walking in the same direction together, it's amazing what kind of solutions come out of that. So in terms of wellness, I think the two go together. I think thriving people tend to be more proactive about wanting to have that high energy or that high vitality, and some of those healthy habits come into play there. The question about flow, I'm a big fan of Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow, and Ryan Quinn has also done some interesting work on group level flow. I think when we're thriving, we're more likely to get into a flow state because of the resources I talked about before. I think if you have more meaning, if you're feeling more positive emotions, I think you're more likely to get into a flow state. But I have not studied that link particularly myself.
Thanks. Another, I think, a nice question that adds on to exactly some of what you were just talking about is from William Andrews. William, are you available to ask your question? This was about approaching the topic of thriving from a model of what it means to be human. Are you there, William? Yes. Hi.
Hi. I've been working with basically a model that is sort of in the early stages of development, but it really taps into the idea of there are some commonalities that we share as human beings, and I've kind of thought of them in terms of what I've written there in my comment, which is, we're relational, we're moral, we're physical, we are both ordered, we have, and once we get into a certain amount of chaos, that creates stress. On the other hand, if we are micromanaged, for example, then that creates stress as well. Creative, a couple others there. And so I kind of, in my own approach, I'm analyzing this idea of thriving, or what I call flourishing, from the standpoint of how policies and culture and organizational behavior generally influences those particular aspects. So sometimes I'm finding that kind of a lens on what it means to be human helps us, and again, there's probably other ways to think about that very broad and philosophical question, but that helps give some insight into the way particular organizational things, policies, culture, etc., would impact the individual. So that was my point there, if you considered it from what it means to be human.
So thank you for the question. I'd love to read your work. It sounds fascinating and important. Our Center for Positive Organizations really got started because I think of us wanting to see more humanity in the world of business. And I think a lot of people felt like the way that we think about work is something hard. Work is something that we use other aspects of life to restore us to be able to go back into the hard work of work. I think what we're trying to do in our center, and what personally I'm trying to do, is create the kind of organizations that we are excited for our children and our grandchildren to go and work in. Organizations that allow people to be their best selves, allow people to feel fully alive at work, allow them to make a positive difference in the world. And in some ways that sounds super idealistic, and it's kind of like, is that really possible? But coming back to, I think, what Sandra might have been leading us to think about is, I think if we don't have a vision of organizations as a place that allow people and to bring their full humanity to work, I think we're really missing something important. And I think we can do a lot better. Now that I have 2 daughters in college, I'm really thinking hard about what's the right kind of organization that I really want them to be part of. And I'm also thinking about how do I create the right kind of classroom to allow my students to bring their full selves and, you know, develop and grow in a psychologically safe place. And that's not just being nice. It's also about challenging people and helping them see their potential where they might not always see it. But I think because we're seeing so many indicators right now of stress levels and workplaces being so high, you know, the Gallup indicators showing high levels of languishing at work, the poor levels of mental health among our college students. I think there's so much that we need to be doing that we're not doing right now. And I feel like I'm just nudging us a little bit in that direction. Your work sounds like it's more of a leap than a nudge, and really important.
If I could just add, I bumped into a book a number of years ago by Michael Novak, who's a theologian philosopher. And so he's kind of writing from that perspective, but it's called Business as a Calling. And it really kind of launched me into this notion of the potential that the organization has either to crush and suppress, you know, our humanness, or to really cause it to flourish. So it's kind of I'd sort of throw that out there as an interesting read.
Yeah, I will look for that. I've read some of his work before, but not that piece. You know, I'll also add that we're finding a number of organizations that are hungry to do this, but they don't know how to get started. Sometimes it's entrepreneurs who are saying, you know, I want to have a product that can sell or a service that makes a difference, but I also want to create a different kind of business model. So we have a consortium of companies. There are about almost 50 now that are affiliated with our center. If you go to our website and consortium of positive organizations, there are organizations that are together struggling to figure out how to do this in a peer-to-peer kind of learning network. And I have to say, I think they're really courageous. We also have a set of executives and residents who are affiliated with our center, who are people that have just moved into the retirement mode. And they're people that have thought a lot about these issues too. I think there's positive deviance out there. I think we want to make them less deviant. We want to normalize, right, that kind of behavior rather than having it be out there at the fringe someplace. And our conversations, especially with our students, I think can be really powerful to normalizing this for them.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, another building on question. So do you see a relationship, or can you imagine a relationship, or have you studied relationships between organizations that are expressly in existence to do good, such as B Corp, and employee thriving?
So I'll tell you, we have a really interesting dynamic here. We have people at the Ross School of Business who study social impact. So they're about how the work of business organizations are making a positive difference in the world through things like sustainability, or maybe different kind of business models, or products, you know, like Tom's shoes, you know, that have kind of a different business model, you know, buy one, give one, that sort of thing. And they think about social impact largely in terms of what the effect of the work organization, or what the effect of the organization is on the larger environment or on customers, doing good that way. I think one of the interesting things is that we sometimes forget about the organization itself, right? And that can we really ask organizations to do good if they're not being good themselves? And I think we need and I think this is what our center is trying to do, is we are very interested in social impact, but we feel like a great place to start with that is in the organization itself. One of our corporate partners over many years was an organization called Humana. They started out as a health insurance organization. And they said to us, they were really frustrated because They felt like so many of their clients, their paying customers, were unhealthy, they were stressed, and they saw the same things with their own employees. And so they came to us and they wanted to have a partnership that would do the research using their own employees to figure out what kind of practices can we establish that actually are creating more thriving employees. And then once we document that in our own work organization and validate it there, then we can take it out to our customers. And I think it's a really interesting model of thinking that the organization kind of has to start with itself first. And once they kind of figure things out, then they can move to the larger, making a difference. But if we do one without the other, I think we're missing a really important opportunity and potential to be hypocritical.
I would agree. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I'm scanning again through the questions. I'm wondering, Michael, maybe you want to wrap up with your question, actually.
Well, I mean, it's sort of a follow-up or or just about the evidence. Do you see or do you have evidence comparing these types of organizations claim to be doing good? I mean, I think the traditional example that you bring, like the nonprofits or the B Corps or whatever, but also is there a limit of people being able to recreate the meaning for themselves and have agency and that kind of thing? Can you just be in any type of organization and then regain control of the narrative about what you're doing in the world? And where is the authenticity of that limited?
Yeah, boy, I think that's a really important question and a hard one to answer in a short period of time. I think some of my earlier research on self-empowerment, I think really fits within that. I think too often I'm working with students or executives who are saying, I'm in the wrong organization, right? I've got to, if I want to, do good, if I want to be good, I'm going to have to quit my job and be an entrepreneur or do something different. And, or find the right B Corp organization to be part of. And what I'm encouraging people to instead to do is to think about what are small wins they can create. True, if you're an abusive organization, you need to leave that organization and go someplace else. But I am also a believer that there are pockets of positive deviance in any system. This is kind of the mode of appreciative inquiry. And if we can find those and spread them, we can start changing organizations from within as well. So I think it starts with the individual making small changes in their own behavior and their own units with their own teams, and then creating some contagion. Can I just ask really quickly? So we at the beginning did I had you give a number on a scale from 1 to 10 about thriving. After we've had this conversation, are you more or less optimistic about whether organizations can, or the new world of work can be a place where people can thrive? So can you either put a plus or a minus in? Do you feel more positive or less positive after this conversation? Can you put that in the chat again? All right, seeing some positive ones. I'm glad to see that. Oh, you plus. Love it. I love it. Well, I think all of us can be a mechanism for doing that, whether it's with our research or with our students or the consulting that we do, even with the way we raise our kids and our involvement in the community. I think we can each make a difference.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen, so much. Thank you all for joining. I know there's someone just sent me an email. I just want to let everyone know this chat will be saved. This session is recorded. This will be available to everyone. There will certainly be opportunity for future dialogue. If you'd like to connect directly with Gretchen, I'm sure that is invited. Is that okay, Gretchen, with you?
Absolutely. And please join our Center for Positive Organizations community of scholars. You'll be on the mailing list. You'll get research that's coming out. And I want to thank you guys. I think these webinars are wonderful. I've been enjoying being part of some of the other, listening to some of the other ones. And so great work.
Thank you. Again, many thanks to all. Join us. We have another conversation in December with Sandra Waddick and Stuart Hart. I put some links in the chat. You can go there to find more information. And the Positive Link series is also there. I didn't put the CPO Community of Scholars, but I earlier had put a link to CPO, I believe, also to the research conference. So
Great. Thank you.
again, many thanks to all. See you next time. Thanks, Gretchen.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.